Hi and welcome to this video where I will be showing you the stripping and reassembly of an EB8420 pin pallet movement from this interesting dive watch. This particular one is a Continental, and we begin as ever by removing the hands. This consists of an hour, minute and central sweep, and then a sub-seconds and 15-minute counter. And the dial itself is held in place with 2 dial screws. An interesting little note showing the combination quick set date and time setting feature of this little EB pin pallet. It's an unusual one. Normally they don't have a quick set feature, but this one, as you can see with these up here, you've got this gear here which has a larger arbor hole than the post it's on, and it can rock back and forth accordingly. And then you've got this here which is your cam, which operates this, which is your jumper lever to do your instant date change. So for your quick date change, with your stem pushed fully in, that's your winding, just to wind up your mainspring. Pull it out, it will only pull out to one position, it won't pull out any further. If you rotate it anti-clockwise, like so, that will rotate the change mechanism as standard and move your hands clockwise. If you move it anti-clockwise, you can see that other gear now moves on that pinion, on that post, and gives you in effect a quick date change mechanism. So let's try and get the glare off of that. So as you can see there, we're turning that and it's working as a quick date change mechanism. To operate in normal hand setting mode, you turn it like so, and if you watch that cam, the snail cam, you'll see that that gradually presses the jumper spring until it reaches the peak of the cam, at which point it will just suddenly snap over, which is obviously your midnight point, like so. That's quite an interesting little system. I just thought I would show that in detail before going any further with the strip down. Next, I remove the balance just to get that out of the way while I work on the dial side before moving on to the movement side. And then back to the movement side, the date assembly is removed. This is a simple modular assembly and is held down by 2 screws and specially shaped washers, and the whole assembly lifts away as a single piece, as you see here. And the date wheel just lifts clear of the date assembly. All the parts are riveted in place, so this is not strippable at all. The remainder of the dial side is a simple process of removing 3 wheels, the hour wheel, the minute wheel and the cannon pinion, and everything else is accessed on the movement side. The stripping of the movement begins by removing the spring clip which holds the 3 chronograph wheels in place. You'll see that can ping away as it did just there. And there's the intermediate drive wheel for the minute counter. The minute wheel and the chronograph runner. Here I'm removing the pallet. And this of course is a pin pallet movement. And then the next step is undoing the two screws at opposite ends of the chronograph bridge and loosening the central one that it slots into. In this particular instance, I fully removed this screw, but it turns out that a complete removal is not actually necessary. And you'll notice a couple of the components have jumped out of place on this side, but I do show the reassembly of this and the order in which they fit back together. So there I'm removing the coupling clutch and the start and stop lever and the hammers. Chronograph assembly is quite a simple setup, deceptively so. The driving wheel on the extended fourth wheel pinion is lifted away. I prefer to use hand levers for these, but you can get a special version tool which is like a Presto hand lifter, but shaped in such a manner that it will remove these wheels. Next, we remove the three screws which hold the balance and train bridge together. The barrel and train bridge rather, that should be. And the barrel on this is a modular unit, much like the EB8820, and it can be removed and refitted separately without having to remove the bridge. Once the barrel and the train of wheels is removed, I go ahead and refit the bridge to enable me to refit the balance in preparation for putting it through the cleaning machine, because I always run the movements through the cleaning machine with the balance fitted in place. This ensures that it's held safely and securely and can't bounce around inside a basket. You can see here that the hairspring is badly out of round, or badly out of centre rather, and this will have to be remedied on reassembly. In this case it was just simply a matter of tweaking the terminal curve to get that centred again, which was quite handy as it cannot actually be removed easily from the balance cock. Reassembly begins by stripping the yoke and setting lever mechanism, greasing and refitting them. This is all fastened at the movement side of the plate at the rear. And next to be fitted is the train of wheels. The pivot holes for these are very, very small and very hard to see without any kind of magnification, and they are drilled directly into the plate. There is another variant of this movement which is, I believe, a 17 joule movement. The EB8420 is a 1 joule movement, and that 1 joule unusually is the impulse pin rather than the balance endstone as it normally is on a 1 joule pin pallet movement. Once the train of wheels is in place, the bridge is refitted, and the modular system whereby the mainspring barrel can be fitted separately is rather handy here, because it allows plenty of room for manipulating the wheels to make sure that everything aligns into the pivot holes. And anybody that's reassembled a pin pallet will know that these can be tricky and quite a fiddle. Once the bridge is fastened down, the barrel itself, once the spring of course has been greased, reassembled and put back in, the barrel can be slid in from the side, and the pin after greasing can be slid in from the top of the bridge. And here we see the mainspring barrel. The copper coloured disc that goes to the bottom is actually the friction gear, which operates in lieu of a friction fitted cannon pinion, and this is what provides the friction for hand setting and allows it to drive for time telling. And the base movement pivots are oiled in preparation for fitting the pallets and the balance to check the running before further assembly goes on. And the same applies to the dial side. There I'm just double checking the pivots and the locations on the dial side versus the movement side. And I'm just cleaning up there with a bit of Rodico where I've misplaced the oil. And at this point there, I am oiling each alternate escape wheel tooth before fitting the pallet fork. Ordinarily, I would oil the pins on a pin lever pallet. However, a recommendation from somebody I know and respect very much with regards to watches, who has worked on watches for many years, made mention that his preferred method with pin pallets was to oil the escape wheel teeth and each alternate one. So I decided that I would try that on this particular movement. And here we see the balance fitted, and you can see it's beating away very nicely there, and overall is giving a very nice amplitude. A brief pause here while I just show you, for those who are interested, the balanced jewel, in inverted commas, setup on a low, typically 1 jewel pin pallet watch, and this is what you will ordinarily see. Now a balance in a watch will have 4 jewels. It has 2 chatons, which are hole jewels, which are set into a brass, a little brass circular holder like this, but whereas this one is all brass with just the hole in the middle. Ordinarily you would have a brass ring that the jewel sits in with a lip for the cap jewel, which is typically curved on one side and flat on the other, and it sits perfectly into the little lip, sort of like this, if I can get this to do this. I'm trying to look at the screen and look at this at the same time. And this little stainless one is a slippery little fellow. So, but just to give you an idea, it would sit in there like so, and then the shock spring sits on the top of that. And this is what acts, the shock spring acts as the shock absorber when the pivot hits this and displaces it during a shock, a drop or a knock or something similar. But in a pin pallet watch, you will have the brass section here, which is just this bit with a tiny hole drilled in for the pivot, and then the cap jewel is a stainless steel, highly polished blank like this. It does the job very, very well. And like any cap jewel, it can wear, it can have a divot worn in it by the pivot of the balance, but for what they are, they work remarkably well. A single jewel, a one jewel pin pallet watch, will ordinarily, the one jewel will be the cap jewel only of the balance end stone on the balance cock, because that's the natural resting position when it's sat dial up, and it's the one that's going to need to be most resistant to wear in general use. Unusually in this, the 8420, the one jewel is actually the impulse jewel. Ordinarily in a pin pallet, the impulse jewel is actually moulded into, it's a brass piece actually moulded into part of the balance. The balances on them aren't particularly user-friendly with regards to disassembly and working on them. I had to do a little bit of adjusting of the terminal curve on this one. The balance spring, the hairspring itself was quite good, but the terminal, the coil was very, very out of centre, which you will have seen on the disassembly. And I had to adjust the terminal curve to get that centered, but I had to do that with everything in place because the balance spring is pinned on this particular one. But interestingly, it does have a movable stud lever, which is nice to enable us to set it in beat. But this is what the end stone will look like. The jewels, or where the jewels would be in the train, are simply just holes drilled into the plate itself. And it is very important because of that to oil all the arbor holes, including the pallet pivots. Ordinarily you wouldn't oil pallet pivots on a pin pallet watch. If you don't, then you're just asking for wear. And although it doesn't move very far, it's a rocking motion back and forth, it will wear more rapidly without lubrication. And it's worth losing a little bit of amplitude if that does occur, to ensure that you have that lubrication. But as you can see, these are very tiny. These are a standard pair of tweezers that you can see there, with quite fine tips, and that kind of demonstrates how small these little things are. But I just wanted to show you that before I throw this back into the cleaner and I oil them and fit them back into the watch. Here we can see a close-up of the balance with the centered hairspring. And at this point here, we begin to assemble the chronograph components, starting with the stop lever and then adding the hammers, which is a separate module which fits over, as you can see. At this point I'm just fitting the components in place and not actually showing the lubrication, because this is quite fiddly and I needed to do this off camera with the lubrication on the certain points to make sure I got that right. And this was more a case of showing how everything goes together. And there's the start lever, stop lever, and the other one's the reset lever. Apologies, I called that the stop lever. And then the chronograph bridge fits on the top of there. There is also a little spring which goes on the start lever, which I will show a little later once that's assembled. And that one's a tricky one. It has to be fitted after the bridge has been fitted and everything has been put in place. And now that's been fitted and all the points greased, there's a tiny washer which goes over the centre hole and has a small amount of oil on that the chronograph runner will pass through and rotates on. So it acts kind of like a floating bushing rather than the chronograph runner bearing directly onto the barrel and train bridge. So there I fit the chronograph runner and the minute wheel, and between those is a post which is lubricated, and then the intermediate driving wheel for the minute wheel is slotted directly onto this post. The upper pivot points for these are then lubricated, and the three-pronged spring is slid into place. And this is the only thing that actually holds these wheels in place and keeps them fixed. And this means it's very important to ensure that these are well supported when fitting the chronograph sweep hand and the minute recording hand, and it can be a little tricky to align those and support the backs of the wheels at the same time. Now here I'm just testing the operation of the levers, making sure they do what they're supposed to do, and there circled you can just see the L-shaped spring, and it's tricky to show, but that has to be fitted after the bridge has been fitted, and it can be manipulated through that slot where you saw it there. The final part of the chronograph assembly is the driving wheel, which fits onto the extended fourth wheel pivot. Here we've got the completed movement assembly with the chronograph works, and I've not done the dial side yet. That's actually quite straightforward, and it's a matter of fitting the hour wheel, minute wheel and cannon pinion, and there's no friction fit items there. They're all loose fit. The friction is actually provided by this copper coloured wheel on the bottom of the barrel, which is a friction fitted, basically does the work of the cannon pinion. It's quite an interesting little thing. And then we have got the two extended pivots here and here, one for the centre seconds and one for the sub-seconds down here, and one for the chronograph counter, which is a 15-minute counter, which is this one up here, and then of course your centre one, which is your seconds counter. So on the back, to show you the chronograph works, I've got a little bit of a problem at the moment. It's running very nicely as is, but when the chronograph is engaged, you'll see it starts to run and then comes to a halt, and you'll see it comes to a stop there. If you disengage it, it will fire back up again and start spinning. And we'll just reset that. I've noticed on close inspection, there's a little burr on the chronograph runner gear down here it's quite going to be difficult to see on the video, but very, very small burr. So what I've got to do is remove the chronograph runner and try and dress that, which is going to be a case of getting in very, very close with a fine stone and an eyeglass and seeing if I can dress that. And I'm pretty sure that that is the main reason, because if you, now typically it makes a liar out of me and decides to continue running. And what I was going to do was point out that if you just sort of nudge it past that bit, it will actually start running again. However, in this instance, it's decided to continue running, but you can see there's still a slightly reduced amplitude in the balance. I'm also going to double check. I'm going to remove this and double check that the pivot is straight on this. And just make sure that all's well, but it does look to be running straight and true. There is currently a very, very small amount of play in the chronograph runner, presumably because I've not got any of the other components on the other side and the hands, but of course it's not running through jewels, it's running through bushings. So we will see soon enough if that's the case. But as I say, hopefully if I can dress up this little burr that's visible, I'll try and get a close-up of that actually and show you. If I can dress that up, then and it will continue to run, then that will be good. We'll see how it goes. Unfortunately, there's very little room for adjustment. There's actually no room for adjustment on this. There's no facility for adjusting the meshing of any gears or anything. So if something isn't right, then it's essentially scrap or a replacement part if you can just replace the relevant part. But what I wanted to show was the operation of the chronograph, and it's quite an unusual one because it works in the same way as a conventional chronograph with start, stop and a coupling clutch, which is this here, which couples your extended gear on your fourth wheel pivot to your chronograph runner, which then via an intermediate wheel turns your minute recording wheel. This is a continuously running one, not a click over once every minute one. And your start and stop are reversed, first of all, which is obviously just due to the layout. So start and stop is at the bottom, reset is at the top. But unlike most chronographs, you started it and it's running. You stop, and what that does is it disconnects the coupling clutch, so that will stop your seconds counting. But once you've done that, you cannot restart it. That's it. That's as much as you've got, and it will stop there. And until you reset it, like so, when you press this, this will move this back out, reset this lever, and drop the hammers down onto the the seconds and minute recording hearts to reset them. You can then press the start button and start it running again. While it's running, another thing that you can do, kind of like, there we go, now you see there that that's stopped. Actually, that's quite handy. So if I just gently nudge that past that part there, you can see it's now starting to pick up and swing again. And I'm fairly sure it's just that little burr on there. I hope that's all it is. So while this is running, with the chronograph running, what you can do like a flyback chronograph is just hit the reset. This will stop the chronograph and immediately drive the hands back to the 12 o'clock position. The difference is it will not restart like a flyback. So it's a bit of an oddity all in all, this movement. It's certainly not something, it's a novelty, it's interesting and it's nice, but it's certainly not something I would say should be taken 100% seriously as a real chronograph, if you like. So, but it's interesting. I like it. I like things that are a little bit quirky and interesting. But you can see there, when you press that, you can see down here, the back portion of this lever where the hammers are will pop out. And that bit there is actually the hammer, which is the separate little bit that you saw in the reassembly video. And then when you press that, the hammers drop back onto the hearts of those wheels like so. So yeah, it's definitely a bit hit and miss that. It's running sometimes, and continuing past and not others. So hopefully a little bit of dressing up on that will rectify it. But you can see if you watch the center wheel how that resets there. So a very interesting little thing. I just wanted to show that in a little bit more detail, because obviously once it's cased up it's not visible, and I just wanted to demonstrate that working. Hopefully you could see in the close-up previously the damage to the slight burrs and damage on the teeth. Using a fine small Arkansas stone like that, I have just dressed that up a little bit and burnished the rough burr off. One of the teeth is a little damaged, but it does seem to have done the trick. But out of every try so far it's run, so hopefully that will have done the job. I don't want to work at it too much because it's very small with very fine teeth, and accordingly very hard to get to. So for that reason I don't want to be taking off too much material or reshaping it. The obvious solution of course would be to replace it, but that would depend on the availability of the chronograph runner for these movements and whether the owner actually wants to go ahead with replacing it. I doubt very much yet. I know he has an awful lot of watches, and I doubt very much the chronograph feature is something he would use it excessively on this when he wears it. I may be wrong on that, but it's certainly running for the moment. And there you go, you can see it's just run past the minute mark. And I'll stop and reset, and then we'll just go again. So it seems to be doing the job. I'm not 100% happy about the fact that it's visibly losing a bit of amplitude when you start the chronograph, but there's really nothing I can do about that because I cannot adjust the mesh of these. There's no facility to do so. So but it's running, which is something. Now we move on to the dial side, and this is quite straightforward, as you'll have seen from the disassembly. It's a matter of fitting the cannon pinion, the minute wheel and the hour wheel, all of which just slip onto the dial. And here I'm just testing that everything's meshing correctly. Next to be fitted is the date module, which drops into place, and once the screw holes are aligned, the calendar wheel is fitted, followed by the specially shaped washers, which also, as well as holding the calendar works plate to the dial, also hold the calendar ring in place. And the calendar works unit was lubricated whilst off the dial, because it's just easier to do that as a module while it's off the dial. And as mentioned, all of the parts on there are riveted, so it's not a user serviceable part. So if any of those parts had been faulty, the actual module would have needed to have been replaced. You'll see that the screws that fit into these holders are putting up a bit of a fight and just refusing to go in at the moment, but we do eventually get there. And then once this is fitted, I just run through that a full cycle to make sure that the date change is happening, the quick snap date change. Here's the finished watch, and the case is just as it was. I was going to strip out the pushers and clean that, but they didn't come out easily. I couldn't see a way to easily get them out. I didn't want to risk damaging them. So they got left as they were. Everything's been recased, the crystal refitted, and the bezel has been refitted. This is just a friction snap fit and is bi-directional, as you can see. And the operation of the chrono, as explained before, but so you can see it in action. You've got the start and stop buttons, which operate on the bottom pusher, and then the reset, which operates on the top pusher, like so. Once you hit the stop, you cannot restart it again, as mentioned. It's start, stop, reset, and you don't have an option to stop and restart as you do with most chronographs. So you cannot restart that until you reset that back to 0, like so. So I'm just going to finish this video with a little time lapse of that running around, so you can see it tripping around, and likewise the minute recorder recording the minutes appropriately. And as you can see there, that's a constant recording minute hand, and rather than snapping over once per minute, you can see that that travels round along with the second sweep. And as mentioned previously also, you can just hit the reset, which is like a flyback, but it doesn't restart when you let go of the reset, like so, until you press the start button again. So there's the finished Continental EB8420 pin pallet chronograph watch. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.